I'm Sherry Dolgoff, born and raised in Houston, Texas. Went to the University of Texas, graduated, and came home to Houston to find my brother and a friend giggling in our living room because a man was going to call me. I was going to summer school before my senior year at the University of Texas, and they said he was a funny guy, and he was going to call me for a date. My brother's 5 years younger than I am. So Norman called that night, and he said, I'm 28. He must have just had his birthday because his birthday's in June. And if that's too old for you, let me know. I was 21. And I said, what difference does it make? I'm not going to marry you. Long story short, I married him. And we lived in Houston for 5 years. And then he got homesick for Savannah and wanted to come back home. And so Norman and I and our two oldest daughters came to Savannah. His mother was still living here. And his brother and sister were living up north, doing other things. And so we moved here, and I met his friends, who were wonderful. And soon after we got here, I was asked if I would be interested in teaching at the Savannah Hebrew Day School. And I did. And that was the start of my career as a teacher at the Savannah Hebrew Day School, and another name, Chai, and then Rambam. I also left once or twice the day school to go to public school teaching simply for financial reasons. It was a labor of love and a philanthropic endeavor to teach at the Hebrew Day School. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. And as much as I adored the children I taught, and I did, there were a couple of times for financial reasons I went to the public school. So I've taught at least 3 public schools here in Savannah, and 24 years at the day school. And that's been, I would say, the best part of living here, besides the people with whom I'm friends, the kids that I taught, who are now wonderful, beautiful, grown-up human beings. It's just an amazing thing to have had a moment with them in their lives as they were growing up. It's just been terrific.
A career teacher always has stories about students that they've impacted, even if they don't know the majority of things that they've done to help people on. About how many students do you think you've taught over the years? Do you have any idea? And do you have any special memories of a student that you learned about that really did benefit from the things that you were trying to teach?
It would be unfair for me to pick one, because I was extraordinarily fortunate in the children I taught. I think probably just about every one of them was wonderful. I'll never forget your son at 5 worrying about the people in California because there was going to be a hurricane or a storm or something, and he was concerned about how they would survive. And it was a very telling moment for me, not just because Harris asked me that question, but because it impressed upon me what 5-year-olds might know and might pay attention to and might be aware of and might be concerned about. It was more of a worldview than just what toy they were going to play with that day. To see them grow from not more than toddlers to thinking, reading, writing, expressing themselves, and understanding more of the world, what could be more thrilling than that? I still think it's thrilling. And I had the good fortune, because I was at the day school, to teach kindergarten in the morning and language arts in the afternoon. So I taught many of these children kindergarten, and then 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in middle school. And it was just thrilling to see their development and where they've all ended up, because they're successful, happy, productive, creative, giving people. And it's just been wonderful.
Is there anything about your Jewish upbringing that aids you as a teacher, or is there something about education itself that, even when you're teaching secular material, has a Jewish bent?
It's interesting you asked that. I think because of my parents and grandparents, the being Jewish overlays everything. It colors your experiences. And because my grandparents came here in 1895, 1896 to this country, and the struggles that they had, and what happened to them during the Depression and everything else, and to make a life, always the most important part was the fact that we were Jewish, and what that meant, and how we lived, and how we practiced the holidays. And my grandmother, every year, if I just lived through another Pesach, that's as she would be outside grating the horseradish and crying. And I think it really impacted me even more. I mean, I've always been involved in Jewish organizations, BBYO, B'nai B'rith Women, and while I was still in Houston, and confirmation class at Beth Yeshurun Synagogue in Houston. But being at a Hebrew day school really brought home the wonderful commitment to Judaism, how important it was to raise our children, to teach our children. And all three of our daughters went to the day school. And I'm very happy that they had the kind of background that I didn't have. I mean, I always knew I was Jewish, and I went to Sunday school, but at that time, a long time ago, girls were not getting bat mitzvahed. And when my brother was old enough to get bar mitzvahed, I was old enough to drive in Texas, which you only had to be 13 to do that. And I took him to his bar mitzvah lessons 3 days a week. But I never had that experience myself. So I was so thrilled that our three daughters had a Hebrew background. They could read and write Hebrew. And I'm even more thrilled to tell you that our two oldest daughters have, in their conservative synagogues in their homes, they have read from the Torah and been part of the congregational services. So that thrills me. Really, it's meant a lot. I think teaching at the Hebrew Day School certainly made me a better Jew and more cognizant of the impact of religion.
The women's movement seems to have bypassed a lot of my Southern sisters when I asked them about any impact it had on their lives and their involvement. You've always, it seemed to me, to be a leader in so many things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But did you actively work on anything during the 70s towards the women's movement? Did you see a change in your students, perhaps, after Title IX and the development of the young women, or perhaps through their religious training, when all of a sudden girls were allowed to be bat mitzvah as well as boys, bar mitzvah?
That's an interesting question, because my first response is not so much. I graduated from the University of Texas in 1964. And I became a teacher because of my love for children. Also because I wasn't good in math because I really wanted to be a journalist, but that's another story. Anyway, and I'd have to be in the College of Arts and Sciences. So I was already married with 2 children by the time the women's movement started. So it didn't have much of an impact on me. Did I see an impact on my daughters? Yes. Yes, the possibilities for them and the wide range of experiences for them meant the world to me because you kind of live through their experiences. And I was certainly glad to see it coming.
You are of the generation that was post-war, but also, as a very young girl, you would have seen the establishment of the State of Israel. And although this might not have been something that you were aware of, were you aware perhaps of the people around you, the adults around you, reacting to the possibility of a Jewish state and homeland?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My maternal grandparents came from a very rough time of pogroms in Russia. And to be a Jew in Russia wasn't a very good thing. And I can remember my mom, her 2 sisters, her 2 brothers, and her mom, my grandfather was kind of tough, all just sobbing with joy at the news of the birth of the State of Israel. I get goosebumps still thinking of it myself. Nothing could be better than to have a place where Jews are not discriminated against. And it seems even today, the only place in the world that might be true is Israel. And you have to fight for every single step you take even there.
I hope to have the opportunity to interview your husband, and you mentioned his wonderful sense of humor. However, both of you grew up at a time when things were not always so wonderful for Jews or throughout the world, and also even in the South. Also, the civil rights might have been very stressful. So, number one, can you speak to any of those types of stories where things were not always wonderful, or there was anti-Semitism, or there was some strife because of civil rights movement and people you knew, their involvement in it? And speak to the other side of that, is that how does a Jew keep their humor, their sense of humor, when things look the worst?
Well, I think a Jew has no choice but to have a sense of humor. And maybe that's why there's so many Jewish comedians. Because you have to find the funny side, the bright side, the positive side, even if you have to make it up. My parents and grandparents were absolutely not prejudiced, did not teach prejudice. We had a housekeeper that worked for us because my mom worked with my dad, and so she needed somebody to stay with us when she wasn't with us. But I never, ever saw my parents or grandparents disrespectful in any way to her, and on the contrary, cared for her like a member of the family. It was interesting, though. I mean, there was never any prejudice spoken in our house, ever. My father had a jewelry store and a pawn shop in the 5th Ward, which was a colored section of Houston. And some days when my mother had to work with my father and couldn't come pick us up from school, Freddie Lee would take me, because my brother was with my mother, but would take me on the bus because she lived around the corner from our store. So she would take me to the back of the bus to sit with her, and I was very irate about that they made her go to the back of the bus. And then she would take me to my parents' store. And so, to me, being with Freddie Lee was like being with part of our family. In fact, we were close to her even after she retired, and her children. And there was never any kind of prejudice in our house at all. And mainly because maybe it stemmed from her parents being so persecuted as Jews in Russia, that that kind of is a trickle-down thing. You know, once you have been the object of persecution, you're not too quick to persecute others. At least in my family, we weren't. And we were taught to respect everybody. It's interesting because, as I said, my father had the store. And by the time I was 8 or 9, he showed me how to stand in front of the store, and if someone stopped and looked at the window, to have a conversation. Is there something that you're looking for? May I show you what we have inside? And I could talk to anybody now. I mean, and I could then too. It was a wonderful piece of training for life. How to speak to someone respectfully, how to listen to what they had to say, and actually hear them. And I'm probably prejudiced myself for my parents. I think they were great parents. They were wonderful and loving and giving, even though they were very strong and firm in what they believed and how they thought people should be treated, all people. And that was a running conversation in our home.
I want to bring us back to Savannah. You've had many positions of leadership, and you've mentioned some in the Jewish community. In the general community, can you think of examples of ways in which the quality of your life was enhanced because you live in Savannah, or that you or your husband or your children participated in secular leadership roles?
For a long time, well, not a long time, but for the first few years I was here, it was because I was Norman's wife, and people accepted me. And my friends were his friends. And one of his best friends was Isser Gottlieb. And so the first time he ever brought me here, I met Isser's sister, Arlene, who is my dearest friend to this day and has enhanced my life terrifically. My 2 oldest daughters, well, actually all 3 of my daughters, after they left the Hebrew Day School, went to public school. And I think that gave them the self-esteem, or enough of a sense of self, to be kind to everybody, to be joiners, because certainly I was, and their father too. And they worked on the student council and did all kinds of things at their schools. Marcy, Karen, and Laura, all 3 went to Bartlett Junior High or middle school, and then Marcy and Karen both graduated from Beach High School. Marcy was salutatorian and Karen was valedictorian there. And our youngest daughter, Laura, being of a different temperament, wanted to go to St. Vincent's Academy for high school. So she did that with my parents' help financially. But I think being out in the general community like that, not only did they learn things about themselves, but they took positions of responsibility and made friends from all different walks of life. I think they had a foundation, and they had seen me and their father work with so many different people and try to do so many different things that they did too. And I'm not sure I answered all your questions because I can't remember all the questions, so I apologize.
Well, what traditions do you hold, whether they're religious or not, that you hope that your children have inherited?
I think it's more a sense of being a human being than tradition. Of course, the Jewish holidays, that's traditions that we've upheld, and so do they. But I think more how you treat people is more important than what you celebrate sometimes. And I can't tell you how proud I am that all three of them had friends from all walks of life, all different kinds of people, connections with their teachers, with other adults, didn't meet a stranger, could go into a crowd of people and introduce one to another with ease. I mean, I think they had a sense of self and who they were and what was important to them, and that, in a way, translated into them meeting people and being part of other worlds in a good way. I know that Marcy and Karen, my two oldest daughters, still have very close friends from high school and extremely close friends from college. And whether they live in the same towns or not means nothing, because they keep in touch with them and they're part of each other's lives. I see them as loving, caring, responsible human beings. And I couldn't be more proud of how they turned out. I mean, to me, that's the best thing I've ever done, is be a parent.
Normally I would end with just asking what grounds haven't we covered that you'd like to talk about. But if you permit me just a few more minutes, you do something quite unusual that actually has bearing on the kind of project that we're doing right here. And that I know that you work as a volunteer for the Savannah Jewish Archives. And you also teach writing skills, and so you understand the importance of narrative. This project is fledgling and it might go in a lot of different directions, but would you tell me something about the kinds of work you do for the archives, and why is it important, in your words, to hear these stories?
Stories are history. And each of us have a personal history, as well as a community history, a family history, a group history. It's so fascinating and wonderful to hear the stories. I mean, we've all grown up in some way. We've all had parents of some kind or another. We've had different influences, and yet with every difference, there's so much commonality. People are fascinating, and whether they think their story is exceptional or not, it is, because it's unique to them, their family, their experiences. And we find, Debbie and I, who work together on it, find it just marvelous to hear those stories and see people share their individual stories with each other and find commonalities when you wouldn't ever expect there to be any. People are wonderful. Most people can be wonderful. And I got started on this community thing. You didn't ask me, but I wanted to tell you, if that's okay. Nobody believes me. I was an extremely introverted, shy, painfully shy child, except around my family. And when I was 13, an older girl introduced me to her friends and insisted I join her BBYO chapter, her BBG chapter. And through BBYO, I guess I found my voice. And it's never stopped. Some people would have liked to ask me to shut up, probably. But because of her, I was my mid-class president. I was a huge BBG enthused follower. I worked at the conventions and the Dixie Council and the Cotton States and the whole thing. I couldn't wait to go to conventions and conferences, and it helped formulate who I was. I was very, very fortunate that this teenager at the time, she was probably 15 or 16, that I looked up to so much, was part of the sorority that I pledged at University of Texas. And she insisted that I come out of my shell and that I speak up and I take a leadership position, and I did. And she, in effect, and I've told her this, changed my life. And really, as much as my parents had a part making me who I am today, because I would have still been sticking to a wall and too shy to speak to other people, instead of now not really meeting a stranger. And she's quite an extraordinary woman. Her name was Marna Tucker, and she's still extraordinary. She's a lawyer in DC. So through BBYO, I got involved and became involved in our citywide BBYO, where there was fundraising and activities and things like that. And I would say that that was the start of my fundraising life. And look where I am today. A lot of people don't even answer my calls because they think I'm asking for money.
I love the fact that for you as a teacher who've mentored so many people over the years, that you have fond memories of those that have mentored you. So I'm going to ask you, for your children, for your grandchildren, for all those classes of children yet to teach, what is the essential bit of information that you think that the next generation needs in order to move forward and to find success?
I think the only thing children need is confidence in themselves. To understand that they are an important individual just because they're a human being. But what they do with that and how they can encounter other people and impact other people by being kind and generous and understanding and concerned, and mainly to listen. I know I talk a lot, but it's very important to listen to others and to understand what they have to say, what their concerns are, what their interests are. I think it would be a better world if everyone could just, hold hands and be friends. It's very naive, I know, but it would be a start.
And then last, you are going from position of a support to position of leadership yet again, as you take on the role of Madam President. Tell me what it feels like from your generation of women where you started to know that you can succeed to become president of not a women's organization, but a major organization.
Well, it's thrilling in many ways. It is thrilling in many ways to even think about being there, being there as the Federation president. I have never, since I've been 13, shied away from taking a responsible role of doing things, president of my pledge class but when I was a senior in college, I was pledge trainer because that was more to my liking than to be president of the sorority, to work with younger people. So that was, like being a counselor in day camp and things, that was working with children, everything. I love that. It gave me great joy. In Houston, if I had still been living in Houston, I could have never aspired to a position like that. Because in Houston, you have to be very wealthy to attain that position. And in Savannah, I'm very fortunate that you just have to work your heart out to be asked to be in that position. It was a surprise to me that anyone asked me. I was shocked, stunned even, disbelieving. But Linda Zoller wasn't kidding, so I so admire and respect her, I could not say no. So that's how I got here. You can blame it on Linda Zoller.
Thank you very much for a really good interview.